It's Friday, August 15th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Herms. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about what happens to these parts of government agencies that are being cleaved off, that are meant to hold those agencies accountable. One of those agencies is the Government Accountability Office, which operates as its own thing, or operated as its own thing, but also worked within certain departments and agencies to make sure they're running properly. Another one is a lot of these departments and agencies had their own offices of inspectors general, essentially internal affairs investigators, to make sure that everything was being done by the law and that people who wanted to come forward with complaints about things not being done by the law or being done unethically, if even still legally, those people were there. And a lot of them aren't. Trump has cleaned house in a lot of places. It was among the first people in the government he actually fired. And since then, I've been thinking about the people who want to come forward, the people who right now, as they're watching unethical things happen in these agencies, things that they're concerned about, things that they're worried about, maybe their agency won't be fulfilling its mission anymore, want to come forward to talk about these things, but they don't know where to go to. Most recently, an FBI agent, a whistleblower, came forward to senators and said that 1,000 FBI agents had been redirected to look for Trump's name in the Epstein files. And then we later learned that some of those agents had been asked or ordered to redact Trump's name. And it's why my guest today is David Kligerman. He is the Senior Vice President and Special Counsel for Whistleblower Aid. He was also the former Chief Legal Counsel for the U.S. Agency for Global Media. And we talk a lot about what it's like to be a whistleblower right now under this administration and this era of American politics, because it may be one of the more dangerous times in American history. We talk about what the work is like for them, that they are just underwater with people who are trying to come forward, and that they're worried that maybe there are cases that while they would normally take them on, there are so many and so many big things happening right now that people are coming forward to talk about, that some things that we should be paying attention to might get swept under the rug or lost in the churn. And then finally, the importance of protecting whistleblowers right now, because it may be important for a lot of reasons to protect them and to have places for whistleblowers to come forward. So before we get to that, make sure that you're following or subscribed to Make It Make Sense on whatever podcast app you listen to this on. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications on YouTube if you're a watcher there. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack. It is just $5 a month to get access to weekly bonus content. And share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word, on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on X and Blue Sky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. All right, let's get to my interview with David Kligerman. We are heading into the final stretch of summer, and let's face it, you need some new sunglasses. Your old ones are scraped or scuffed, or maybe, like I did, you sat on them because you left them in the car, and it's time to replace them so you can finish out the summer in style. That's where Aquila comes in. Independently designed and handcrafted in LA, they offer timeless style, uncompromising quality, all without the inflated price tag. And their styles are unisex and look great. I really like their Essential line. It's a cool throwback look that really fits my day-to-day style. I can throw them on and know that they'll fit my fit. And you can feel good about wearing Aquila sunglasses too, whether it's the UV blocking sunglasses, the blue light clear lenses, or the prescription eyewear. It's all made from 50% recycled materials, including recycled lenses, eco-friendly plant-based plastics, and it's shipped to you in sustainable, plastic-free, biodegradable packaging. Plus, all Aquila frames come back with a 1-year warranty, just in case anything should happen to them. You just ship them back and they'll fix them up, or they'll get you some new ones. So right now, you can get an exclusive 10% off your next pair of Aquila glasses, their highest discount of the summer, when you use the code MIMS25 at checkout. That's MIMS25 on your entire order. Now, Make It Make Sense does get a cut of that, but, it's just another reason to go check them out. Protect your eyes, support the show. It's a win-win. So visit aquila.la, that's AKILA, and use the promo code MIMS25 at checkout. Aquila, unisex handmade sunglasses from LA. Independent style meets unbeatable prices. Elevate your look with modern eyewear concepts. All right, let's get on with the episode. Thank you so much for doing this, because I think this is such a big issue that people aren't talking about right now.
My pleasure.
I think when we think of whistleblowers, we think of, all the president's men and Deep Throat. We think of Aaron Brockovich. We think of Grisham's The Rainmaker. Those are whistleblowers occasionally, but most often, who are whistleblowers? How do these things work?
Right. That's a great question. And we often talk about that amongst ourselves and with our clients here at Whistleblower Aid. Whistleblowers are folks from any walk of life and from any organization who want to bring to life, wrongdoing, who want to air concerns they have about the operation of the organization that they're in, that are inconsistent with some governing concept, principle. We think of whistleblowing in the government context often in terms of law breaking, right? Because there are a lot of laws that govern and dictate how the federal government operates. But when we talk about whistleblowing more generally, we're talking about bringing things to light that aren't otherwise being brought to light. And a number of those things involve harms to the public. And so what we talk about at whistleblower.org and how we think about cases and how other people in the field think about cases and matters is public interest. And so whistleblowing ultimately is some matter that's in the public interest, that someone inside some organization, whether it's a private sector healthcare organization, whether it's the government, whether it's a large internet corporation, is seeing something that is wrong. They know is wrong, they're legally wrong, morally wrong. The public is being lied to, and these individuals bravely come forward to disclose that truth because it's in the public interest. And there are laws out there, a number of laws at the state level and at the federal level, that protect that right of individuals to blow the whistle, to disclose these truths that otherwise would be sealed off from the public.
What is the difference between a leaker and a whistleblower? Or is that just a difference, not a distinction? Or is it more like, all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are
Right.
squares kind of situation? So what is the difference?
Yeah, I mean, a whistleblower is not a leaker, and a leaker is not a whistleblower. I think that they're two different things. And a leaker is a pejorative term, and we hear it a lot in this administration. We've heard it in past administrations. This administration particularly fond of throwing around the leaker label. But whistleblowers are those individuals who follow lawful processes to allow information to come to light of day. And so just because information is otherwise behind closed doors and someone brings it out to sunlight, to the antiseptic of sunlight, to share it with the public and who needs to know these matters or these issues, doesn't make them a leaker. There are instances where, particularly when we deal with the intelligence community, whether it's us at whistleblower.org or our colleagues, where there are disclosures that are only lawfully made through certain mechanisms. And so intelligence, for example, classified information, there are certain ways that you can disclose it legally and certain ways you can't. And so I think what we would say is someone's a lawful whistleblower or they're not. But I think in every instance, when we think about leaker, we really think of it as a pejorative term, and a term that is used to tar and feather those who are coming forward honestly. But whistleblowers are not leakers. Whistleblowers are people who have a right to share the information that the public has a lawful right to know.
Walk me through some of those laws and how they work, because I think when people do think about whistleblowing, it is an act that often gets described as illegal, especially by this administration. We're going to talk about that a little later here, but it gets bandied about that this is an unlawful action, but there is a lawful way to do what whistleblowers do. So walk me through those laws.
Sure. So we'll talk about on the federal side when we're dealing with federal government employees. So there are statutes. The most prominent one is the Whistleblower Protection Act, and then there have been amendments to enhance Whistleblower Protection Act, et cetera. But the base statute is the Whistleblower Protection Act, and that protects individuals in most government agencies, and there are other protections for those who aren't covered by the Whistleblower Protection Act, to come forward and share information about breaking of laws, rules, or regulations, or information that the individual might subjectively believe is a violation of some principle. So someone's bringing forward maybe that the organization is supposed to be doing this, and it's not doing that, either because it's legally required to, or because the organization has said it's doing this to Congress. The organization's materials indicate to the public that they're supposed to be guarding public health, and instead they're allowing polluters to pollute, whatever it may be, right? They've got this information. The act says that you're able to come forward and share that information. There's a number of ways as a baseline that you're able to do that, right? One is you're able to go to Congress and share that information. Another way is you're able to go to your Office of Inspector General, to the Office of Special Counsel, and we can talk more about these bodies, but they're all different parts of the federal government apparatus. And in instances where the information isn't classified and there otherwise isn't another legal restriction, and so in many cases you are able to go to the press, right, and share that information. And a lot of it really just depends on what that individual may think is the most effective means of doing it. But the reality is that the act does protect public disclosure, and public disclosure is very broad. So whether that disclosure as a baseline is made to any of the avenues that we talked about, Congress, Inspector General, a special counsel, even within your own organization, right? A lot of whistleblowers you'll find are not just something happens and they take their shoe off and pound it on the table and say, that's it, I'm going public with this, right? They've worked through their organization. They've said, wait a second, they brought up their chain of command. They've said, this isn't right, what's going on? And they've even either encountered sort of whataboutism, or they've encountered some sort of resistance, pushing back. And then what you often see with whistleblowers, and we see a lot at whistleblower.org and our colleagues in this space, see is at some point, if someone continues to raise these concerns about something that's unlawful in an organization, those antibodies may start to rise up and they might start to go after that individual, right? And so there are whistleblower laws that also protect the individual from retaliation. So an important part of the whistleblower protection laws aren't just to ensure that organizations don't make rules that prohibit people from coming forward and sharing this information, but also establish rules that prevent retaliation against those people who come forward and share that information. Because organizations are wont to do that, and they can get very clever, right? They're not going to necessarily say, oh, we're doing this because you raised this, right? They'll say, oh, it's because of this other thing that we just happen to have discovered or made up. And so and there are bodies, I mentioned in the federal side, the offices of Inspector General, which are very important, or the Office of Special Counsel, or other entities, Congress, that can look at this and raise questions.
Do you often find that the whistleblowers that you work with, or that your colleagues in this space work with, these folks are kind of at their wits' end, or it's the last straw for them to disclose these things publicly? They've tried within their own organizations, they've tried going through the proper channels, and they just aren't getting the results that they want, and so then they end up in front of you? Is that generally?
Yeah. And there's two paths, right? Path. It always starts. I don't think anybody in this space encounters in the ordinary course of things. Certainly, at whistleblower.org, the normal thing is someone has raised this, as I mentioned, internally through some process, and they've hit a wall. There may be some instances where and you do get sort of the smoke-filled room, right? Where people are saying, hey, let's do this, and it's the most senior level people. I mean, at some point, then of course you're going to go right to, hey, I've got to go outside of my organization. And we're seeing a lot of that in this administration, right? Where at some point it's not just the rank and file, but it's it goes up to the top in an organization, and you need to be able to come forward. And so, in that case, you would go to an Inspector General, or you would go to the Special Counsel for government. But people are and they either go to those organizations, those entities, and they say, I want to disclose this, and they realize there's a process. That also a lot of our clients at whistleblower.org are suffering some sort of retribution or threat of retribution, right? So they're looking to protect themselves, or in some instances they're looking to remain anonymous, right? The law allows for anonymous disclosure. It's a myth that a lot of folks will use to tar and feather whistleblowers, that they're just seeking publicity, right? They just want their 15 minutes, and we further from the truth. This is a big commitment that folks undertake, and their folks want to get the message out. And so the message can be got out with them remaining anonymous. But when they're coming to us, they want to do usually one of two things. They want to make sure that the world knows the truth, and they want to make sure that in telling the truth, that they're protected, and there are mechanisms that we can help them in doing that.
Yeah, I think too when we talk about whistleblowers and people who come forward, yes, it's they get tarred and feathered in this 15 minutes of fame thing, but it's also that these are these malcontents within these organizations that went outside the proper channels, and
Right.
just so often that's not who these folks are. They did the things that they thought they were supposed to do and then realized that they're not getting the results that they think should happen. And I think there's also this thing too, is that you mentioned it earlier, that sometimes it's also a perception of
Right.
wrongdoing as well. And when a whistleblower comes forward that has a perception of wrongdoing, it turns out that's not actually wrongdoing. What are the risks there for them? And then I want to talk about the actual risks of proper whistleblowing as well. But like,
Right.
what happens here when somebody comes forward with a concern that's in the end not borne out to be real?
Right. And that's a form of proper whistleblowing. So I think what we that we almost always see, and certainly in the cases that we're involved with, because we'll do vetting at whistleblower.org and other organizations, is that you'll be able to verify to some extent whether in the basis of the allegations, and you'll be able to paint a picture of what's going on in the organization. But the whole purpose of the law, just as a baseline matter, is to allow folks to not fear sharing their perception of what's going on. So we're not talking about someone saying, "Oh, I had this vision, I did a seance and I pictured." These are folks who are coming forward because they're seeing something that is off, and they're making it known. And in some instances, when something looks like it's off, and something, and you kick the tires and it appears to be off, maybe it's not off. And there are those rare instances, and those individuals are protected, because otherwise it would have a cascading chilling effect, right? Then you have to second guess yourself, because the whole nature of the things that are disclosed in whistleblowing are things that are behind closed doors. And so there are layers of things. It's not as if in most instances that you're privy to all of it. But I will say it's a very, very small number of matters, particularly when they sort of come to organizations like ours, that there's question about whether or not they actually have witnessed something, or that it's not objectively true. And certainly by the time ourselves and our colleagues take any matter and folks are coming forward, and whether it's represented by whistleblower.org or others in this space, folks have done their diligence. That's our job, right? So that's the piece that we play too, is that, we're making the disclosure, we're helping facilitate the disclosure that the client is making, but we're a 501c3 that's chartered in the public interest, right? So the disclosures that we're making are good for the public. They have high impact public interest disclosures. And so whether it's at whistleblower.org or other organizations, we're always looking to make sure that everything lines up. And so when you see folks who come forward in this space, and they're coming forward and they're deemed credible because they're represented or supported by an organization like ours, and then to have things thrown at them that, this isn't true, or this is objectively, those are parts of smear jobs, right? When it gets to the point where organizations like ours are taking them on, we've done the vetting, and we've looked at it, and we're allowing folks to make their disclosures. It's their disclosures, but we don't turn a blind eye to the substance, and helping them, helping vet it for them and for ourselves.
Sure. Have you guys been underwater lately with people coming forward talking about what's been happening inside specifically federal government agencies, as we've seen what Doge did, or we've seen the cuts that have been made to places like the NIH or the CDC? Have you guys just been inundated with people coming forward?
Yeah, there are a lot of people coming forward, and one of the challenges, and we're seeing it now for these people, is if the administration is simply cutting away, lopping off the heads of entire divisions or portions of agencies, or even entire agencies, and you come forward and you're making a disclosure in the context of that, some will say, well, they're just removing everyone at the agency anyhow, right? So, they're not removing you because of this disclosure. They're removing them because they're removing everybody. So in some ways, you have people who are on these sinking ships who are making these disclosures, and the ship is going down. And so I think what's changed, and what makes it not just more busy, but also more pressing, is that these individuals and the information and their stories need to be protected as the agency itself or the whole class of individuals at the agency are going down, because these are disclosures that are important for the American people to understand what's going on with those agencies. Even if the agencies are being slashed and burned, there's still numbers of instances of corruption, of malfeasance, misuse of technology, um, uh, administration lying to the public, et cetera. And so those are really important to get out. And in some ways, the rush is doubled for organizations like whistleblower.org, because as the organization goes down, you want to be able to preserve these things, right? Even if there's no action that can happen in the short term to protect that individual who's come forward in terms of restoring their job or other things in the usual course of things, because they're gutting and they're slashing and they're burning. You want to preserve these things. And we often, I think, in the field talk about thinking of this almost like, sort of some future truth and reconciliation commission, right? The idea is we're trying to save all this information before it's lost, because someone's going to have to come forth when Congress isn't captured by the same party that's in the White House, or when Congress wakes up and begins to recognize itself as a separate branch of government, regardless of what party you're in, and starts to call these things into question. They need this information, because it's all, every one instance is part of a tapestry. Not to say that disclosures in themselves are not important, and they are. They're often showing, extraordinary wrongdoing. But in a time when the wrongdoing is at such an incredibly high level, that the need really is to capture all the places it's being done, how it's being done, and to also inform ourselves as we rebuild as a country. What are the weaknesses that we have in the system? How do you protect people going forward? How do they do it so it doesn't happen again? It's a pretty sad place to think of yourself being in, but it's really important. So we're busier than ever, as are others in the field, and it's compounded by this time element. That's not just the disclosure where you are able to say there's something that's happening with this program or this thing, and we're gonna help right the ship. This is really saving, in a lot of instances, this information, these narratives, before they're completely destroyed in all the chaos.
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that, because so many of the conversations that I have on this show and some of the things that I've talked about in the last, 6, 7, 8 months now have been about the loss of just the information that we keep in all these different departments and agencies, whether it's health, whether it's Bureau of Labor Statistics, whether it is the Department of Education, whether it's the DOJ, it's all these places, and we're losing these things. I wrote an article a little while ago about all these librarians across the country who are working to
Right.
keep these stories and keep these data pieces together. But I think the avenue you're working in is also really interesting, because it does have that sort of truth and reconciliation, I don't know, flavor to it in a sense. That is this thing that this will be used and needs to be saved now for posterity's sake.
Right. For forensic, right. Almost like, for forensic purposes, right?
Much better word. Yeah, for forensic purposes, political forensics later. Absolutely. Are you finding too, speaking of that, in this sort of forensic process, losing things like the government accountability offices in certain departments, OIGs, offices, inspector generals in certain departments and agencies, even internal affairs governing bodies within these agencies? Are you seeing that as those have been stripped away, that it's harder for whistleblowers to find the right avenues to come forward? Are a lot of folks, when they get to you, say, I'm not sure I was going to do this, normally I would have gone to the IG, but they got fired, I didn't know where else to go? Is that a thing you're hearing more often?
Yeah. What you're seeing is an absolute attack on these internal mechanisms for accountability, right? We've seen in a lot of agencies where they've gone after. I mean, Department of Justice is a really good example, where very early on, in the first number of weeks, and we're still counting it in weeks, of the Trump administration, they got rid of the people in the Office of Professional Responsibility in Department of Justice, and that's the division that adjudicates whether or not attorneys are breaking the ethical rules, whether they're following proper practices in the way they lawyer, right? And then so they go to that first, and then we've seen then to the ethics office at DOJ, and then we've seen the Inspector General Michael Horowitz, who was there a very long time, and was considered, even President Trump has said, fairly kind things about him, but he's left to go to the Fed, right? So there's an example of an organization where you've lost a lot of these protections, and you have individuals in these organizations and other organizations across the government where there is concern. And first of all, there's obviously backlog when you lose these folks who can actually do anything to help you facilitate. So you've got, if you had 50 people and 50 cases, now you might have 500 cases and 5 people, right? I mean, that may be a little stark, but something along those lines, right? You grind it to a halt. And I think there's a concern, perhaps about folks about efficacy, about lack of trust. I mean, I don't think that we are at the point yet where we're saying the inspector general's offices have been co-opted necessarily, but you begin to see they're in, at some agencies, what we've seen is they've physically made the IG's office co-located or closer to where the headquarters office is, right? Or they put people in there that there could be a concern that now that disclosure could make its way to folks who you don't want to know because you want it to be confidential. But I still think, and the hope is that those mechanisms are still partially in place. But I think that ultimately what the larger concern is that individuals who are going to those parts of their organizations, or to the Office of Special Counsel, who we saw the Special Counsel removed, and now
Right.
they've nominated someone as administration who is patently unqualified to have that position, right? And
Right.
Gracia's only qualification is a loyalist who's willing to get rid of career folks.
Right. The new head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, for listeners. Yeah.
Oh, no. This is Ingracia is the individual who is nominated to be the head of the Office of Special Counsel.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, that's right. I was thinking of the guy
Yes, no,
yes.
and well, that there's so much churn, right? So there's this this is already yesterday's news because it's only a few weeks ago, right?
Right.
We have a lot of folks coming to us. We have more folks than we've ever had coming to us, and I think ourselves and other organizations are strained but are making do because it's really important. And so part of it is when you have a mission that you value and look at what's in the public interest and what you take, right? That's a shifting scale, right? So things that we would have had bandwidth to take, 2 years ago, which are really extraordinary things, might not be things that even in this universe are considered extraordinary. And so a lot of good cases sometimes risk being ending up on a table, and sometimes we'll call others in the community, or sometimes we'll individually take them on pro bono ourselves in our private practices. But I think that there is a fear of so much being lost because people aren't so comfortable going to the IGs, or that IG process isn't working for them.
How worried are you about the things that are going to fall through the cracks, because there are now so many of these people coming forward because of the nature of the government right now in this administration, but also because you're busier than ever, which obviously those two things are connected. But, how many, you don't actually have to put a number on this, but
Right.
just how many cases do you think you aren't going to get to, and those things are going to fall by the wayside?
Certainly a material number of cases. I think that, and then the way we think about it is you look at whistleblowing and disclosures is often one thing leads to another, right? So is something the tip of the iceberg, or is something the iceberg? And so often when it comes to disclosures, and we see this now, we see this all the time, is person A says something, and then you, as an attorney, work with them, or whoever's working with them, and they say, and you say, what about this, and this? And say, oh yeah. And then then they talk to another person, and you begin to sort of see a scheme or something complex, right? And a lot of the major disclosures do involve multiple whistleblowers, right? So the other challenge is, if you are, and we're mindful of that, right? So we're bending backwards. We're working overtime at whistleblower.org. We're all hands at deck all the time to pull those things in and really kind of dig beneath the surface to see if there's that potential. But ultimately, what's lost is the ability to pull together these larger issues that might not be, or these larger bodies of individuals who may come forward that may not be necessarily clear to one on first blush, right? So what's lost essentially is a bit of the luck factor, if you will, right? And I don't say luck's a strong word, but a bit of the normal archaeology, the normal diligence and discovery that leads you to these bigger nuggets of truth that the public deserves to know. And when you're looking at things in more of a triage mode, there's this risk of losing those disclosures. And then you compound it with the IGs are open, but are they really doing anything meaningful right now? When there is retaliation against whistleblowers, the places that they would go to an IG or a special counsel is foreclosed. And so there's this profound sense of amongst all of us that we're playing our fiddle, not playing our fiddle, Romersburg, we're doing a lot, but we want a million fiddles, right? We want to capture this as much as we can. And at whistleblower.org, we partner with others and we bring a lot in, but I do think that there is just this fear that we leave on the table too many individuals that we can help because there's only so many hours a day. There's only so many resources we have right now. And we're always hopeful and grateful for the support we get, but this is such an unprecedented time. We're always pushing to get more support to really push our things over the finish line. Exhausted is a strong word. I think we are sanguine, right? I think we recognize in the same way that folks who are doing medicine in a war zone or folks who are doing other things, that we've got to keep on keeping on. And I think one of the things that we need to do, folks in this field and folks in this country also is, keep in mind that there are institutions that we count on to still work, and that those of us in the field just have to keep pushing those institutions to be accountable, which means capturing all this information, holding people's feet to the fire by putting it forward, notwithstanding the fact that it's being made very, very challenging. So I think for those of us in the field, we are working double, triple, quadruple time to do that.
Would you say this is a more dangerous time for whistleblowers, given the way that the president talks about retribution and the way that the DOJ is being used underneath him? Is it more dangerous for whistleblowers to come forward right now?
I think there's certainly fear, and I think fear is part of the program, right? So then you get sort of preemptive compliance, and so that's the desire when any government that is illiberal tries to do these things. And by illiberal, I don't mean conservative or democratic. I mean that not trying to honor the rule of law, trying to use force as a means to coerce individuals or threat of force, whether it be arrest or being named an EO. I mean, we can think Miles Taylor, who was the former chief of staff of the Department of Homeland Security, a famous whistleblower under Trump 1, was on the board of whistlebloweraid.org. He stepped off when we agreed to help him in his legal defense, precisely because he was a targeted whistleblower, right? He was a subject of an executive order under Trump. Only a few months ago, it seems like years ago, just a few months ago, Miles is out there, bravely raising the call and saying, I'm not afraid. And we're working to support those like Miles. Mark Zaid, who is our founding partner, and someone else who has been targeted, had his clearance stripped. And we had one of the people involved in doing it, laughing about it on a televised interview. So, these are things that are designed to have a chilling effect. I think we're hopeful that people are not afraid to come forward. They are coming forward. Maybe that we would see 25% more coming forward, and the fear is keeping people back. We have mechanisms, and I think that we are known in the community and at whistleblower.org and others to make sure that our people are protected, right? That they remain anonymous, that the disclosures they make are done in a way that protect them from any legal repercussions. So I think for us and for people out there who have come forward or are looking to come forward, I think one of the things that they're pleasantly surprised by when they do come forward and they begin to inquire is that the protections that we can afford them are still there. And in some ways it's more liberating, right? Because if you know you're being fired and your agency is being slashed and you're out the door, right? And and you know that they're threatening everybody in a sort of implicitly in a ham-handed sort of way. Some people say, what do I have to lose, right? This is really important to me. I'm not going to be cowed. And so I think it's in some ways had and we hope it continues to have it, the opposite effect, right? Which is bolstering people's resolve to come forward, even if it's the purpose of disclosure is not to necessarily, the ability is not to change what they're doing because these folks are bulldozing everything. But again, to make that disclosure so that the truth is out there. And in some instances, we do stop things, right? We do have cases that we're still bringing to special counsel and other places. But the resolve of the people that come forward, notwithstanding this attempt to silence and threaten them writ large, is really something, and it's really heartening. And I think for those of us at Whistleblower Aid and others in the field, it's really something that's inspiring.
Do you feel targeted as an organization, as an individual, by this administration for helping these whistleblowers?
I mean, there's always a sense that your space is at risk, and I think the way that we think about it is, given that risk is a function. I like to think about it as well. As risk is a function of likelihood times consequence, and consequence also then is a net consequence, right? The consequence of doing it and the consequence of not doing it, right? And so I think when we look at that, maybe there's an increased likelihood, right? But the consequence of something happening to us, but the consequence of not coming forward, right? The consequence of allowing these individuals, whistleblowers, to not be protected and be represented is such that it actually lowers, in some ways, the risk, right? In some ways, it feels less risky because of the grave amount of the threats that the Republic faces.
Does that help you in a way here kind of beat back the idea that so much of people who are standing up and speaking out lately, I think to a lot of folks, has felt like shouting into the void? Does that sort of hope that you're feeling and that sort of you mentioned sort of a liberation feeling earlier, does that help you, I think, just get up and go to work every day? Is that how you get there? Is that how you just get in the door?
Yeah, it's fun. We at whistleblower.org, we have a morning, like every organization, a morning staff meeting and a call, and we talk through these things, and it does, right? It's a little bit of a band of brothers and sisters type thing. It does help you get through it, that there is a civil society call to action. We're part of this larger civil society apparatus. So what you also have seen, and what we've seen, are a lot of partners coming forward to help buttress organizations like ours in terms of support, right? There's recently been a series of seminars put on by the Carter Center, which is supporting nonprofits in the civil society and democracy space by letting us know and training us in the risks and how to counter them. And so there are colleagues in the room, and we're all taking notes together or sharing experiences or thoughts about, what happens if, if they do, someone does kick down the door, right? And say, okay, give me your files. Or what happens if they do try to strip your 501c3 nonprofit status? Or what happens if this, or what happens if that? And so, there are examples that abound about those in the civil society space who are stepping up to lock arms with organizations like ours. There are any number of organizations out there, and there's some of the ones that are well known who have stepped up, and then new ones that have come forward. So that's the part that feels heartening too, is that you're not alone in this fight. You may be, I don't know if outnumbered is not right. We're not outnumbered in the fight. We may be outgunned in some ways, or you may feel outgunned, but we're certainly not alone in the fight. And ultimately, we're on the side of right. And I think that we need to be able to believe that. And we do believe that if we're asking our clients to put on the line to do that. And so, maybe we're kind of, little bit nutty, happy warriors. But I think more likely we're folks who are, because we're so in awe of the people who are willing to come forward and humbled by the ability to bring their matters forward at whistleblower.org, that, it feels like such a little price to pay and such a little thing to do, is to really be excited and forward looking when we come to work. Because if we can help these individuals who are really the ones who are putting on the line, then we've done something good. And I think anytime you're able to do something good, particularly in bleak circumstances like this, it's empowering, it's enervating, and it's motivating.
My last question here is for people who are going to listen to this who aren't whistleblowers. They're not going to be someone who's going to come to you or your colleagues. What would you tell them about how they should be responding to when they hear reports about whistleblowers right now? Is it just solidarity? Is that enough? Obviously, I will put links to whistleblower.org in the show notes to this episode, but is just making sure that they pay attention a little more when they hear or read whistleblower in a headline or in a story. Is that enough right now?
It's a start, right? And I think it's really hard. It's really hard to stay tuned in. And so what is important is to recognize that when you hear the word leaker coming out of those bodies, whether it be the government or it be a corporation who's accused of malfeasance or some other entity, and so they're not whistleblowers, they're leakers, or whistleblowers are malcontents. Listen for that. And when you hear that, think about it. Think, why would folks say that? And why would someone come forward, given all the risk to them, particularly in this environment, right, where things are being leveled in some ways regardless of the allegations, right? And they're coming forward to kind of just put it out there. What is their benefit versus the detriment to them? And why would anybody, come forward and do it such, it's such risk in terms of their mental well-being, in terms of doing this. I'm not, when I say whistleblowers are at risk in that way, but willing to step forward and listen to their better angels and come forward, notwithstanding that it's a taxing process to do so. And when you hear that, and you hear them being dismissed as leakers, or dismissed as malcontents, or dismissed as lawbreakers or unethical or what have you, think about why that's being said, and think about that the story that's coming forward. If it's come through a whistleblower, it's imagine that someone has winnowed their way through all this patchwork of barbed wire and landmines and other things that kind of come at the end with this message that they're bringing forward. And so I think to listen to it even more carefully, because the person has delivered that message, even if they've done it anonymously, still potentially at risk. And I think that makes the message in a lot of ways more powerful. And so when you hear whistleblower, or you hear people trying to tar people who are whistleblowers, I think stand up and really listen to that message. And I know at whistleblower.org and other places, we stand up when people come forward to share their experiences with us, because it's just extraordinary what people have seen and what they're willing to share at risk themselves.
Well, David, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's great to sit down and chat.
I want to thank David again for coming on the show. If you want to find links on how to help whistleblowers, or if you want to blow the whistle yourself on something, you can find a link to whistleblower.org in the show notes to this episode. And that is it for this episode. Please rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you're listening to it on. Like, subscribe, leave a comment below on YouTube if you're a watcher. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am @Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and @Grant Herms TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you next week.